Chambers, and Alder McElhaney is attending remotely, so all are in attendance. First order of business is approval of the minutes from our 7/7 meeting of this year. Do I have a motion to approve?
I'll move to approve.
Thank you. A second, please. I have a second. Any concerns, questions with the content of the minutes? Seeing none, all in favor of approval, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. And Alder McElhaney, just to be sure, I'm going to probably be calling on you to vote after we do here so we can be sure how you voted.
Aye.
Okay, thank you, and welcome. Next order of business, discussion and possible action on the issuance of a request for proposal, RFP, for the former West Side Battery at 415 South First Avenue. Mr. Fitzgerald.
Thank you, Alderman Dell. There we go. Thank you, Alderman Dell. You received the staff memo that was in the packet. The 415 South First Avenue property, the former West Side Battery, has been in city possession for about 6+ years here. It has gone through an RFP a handful of times during that period. Recently here, there's been 2 proposals that came through for circumstances outside the city's control. Unfortunately, both of those proposals fell through and did not come to fruition. The city has the keys back to the property again, and we brought this up at last month's meeting, but wanted to have a larger conversation among the committee members if this is something that we should take back out for an RFP immediately, or given the current economic environment, there might be some consideration of holding off and vetting some options a bit further.
Alder Rasmussen.
Thank you. I think Mr. Fitzgerald hit it on the head. I think with the uncertainty that exists in the economy, both locally and statewide, I think that, people's reluctance to borrow money, build, and spend is just not there right now. And I think it would make sense. We've had the property this long. We want a quality proposal, and we'd like more than one proposal. And I think that there's really no harm in waiting. I feel like if we let this rough period pass by and maybe sit on this for a little bit, and then, we'll certainly want to go out to RFP again, but it would certainly make sense to wait, at least 6 months, because we just don't know, where we're going to be at with COVID-19 and then economic recovery thereafter, even if, people are, less worried about going out and gathering once there's a vaccination, assuming that happens maybe early next year. The economy recovery isn't going to be immediate, and so I feel like I'd like to see us wait rather than go through the motions again and get, limited responses or none. And, I don't feel like we need to be in a hurry.
Well, well taken. We're not beholden to any time limit for an RFP response, though. I mean, if it were out there with a really long, response time, people, at least it would be in the public realm, and people can be thinking about it and sort of planning ahead and whatnot. So, because if we just don't do anything and then we finally do release it, let's say December or whatever, and then, when is our due date, for responding? So I don't know. Does anybody feel that there's any value to, sending it out but not having like an imminent due date? Okay, just a second, Mr. Larson. Go ahead, Alder McElhaney.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, I thought about this a lot. I know that I have gotten a lot of feedback from my residents as these proposals have gone on. And so I would like to hear Mr. Fitzgerald's view is that I was all ready to say, yes, let's wait, because we don't want these proposals and then petering out. And I agree with COVID right now, everything's up in the air. I think that, we've lost 2 proposals for 2 vastly different reasons, and they were both, valid reasons, but I worry about us, constantly losing this the look of it. And I'd just like to ask Mr. Fitzgerald, do you see any upside to, as Alder Neal had stated, let's put this out now with a very long, end date for people to think about, or is it better? What is your thoughts about holding back until the economic system is more clear?
It's a good question, and I can tell you that, we receive calls and visits from developers weekly, for just developers in the city in general. And some of them are from the community, some are from outside of the community, some are from outside the state, and we have a variety of properties that we're introducing them to in the community based on their desires for a development. The West Side Battery one is one that's come up a handful of times in recent weeks. So we are introducing it as an opportunity that's available to developers. Whether there would be an idea from someone that comes forward and there's not an open RFP process, I guess I'm new to the position. I'm not sure, I don't know if we can take a proposal like that to this committee for consideration, or whether we need to open up an RFP process. If that's the case, maybe it is valuable to have a extended RFP process that's open. But if not, I don't know what the committee's concern is about having, RFP after RFP that has continually come back with not bearing any fruit on it, and if there's any concern, I guess, about doing that once again.
That's a good point. I mean, we can't maybe act on something if we don't have actually a public RFP out there, and somebody is coming in and asking about it and showing interest. So I do see some value for an open-ended one. Alder Larson?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair, first. If you wanted to put a break on it, why not put a for sale sign out on it? Hire a realtor, see what they can do with it. Just a thought.
Thank you. Alder Rasmussen?
Along those lines, we do have options. We aren't required to go through RFP, to my knowledge, because we've done this a number of different ways. If someone would happen to just come in and want to buy the property, we could certainly consider one offer. We did that with the property that Urban West is sitting on currently. It was listed with a realtor. There was an offer. We sold it, for what we had in it. So you can list it through a realtor. You can, if someone comes in and wants to buy it, we could certainly consider that offer, here in this format. Or if you wanted a variety of proposals and you wanted to narrow the criteria for what you're looking for, you'd use an RFP, of course. That's a public-facing process that's, a little easier for people to understand and get their arms around. But, I guess if we were going to go to RFP again and have like a rolling, open-ended RFP like we did with some of the Thomas Street remnants and some of those things, I feel like that's not a whole lot different than just listing it on the development website as available, because the energy around the release of the proposal, the longer it sits out there, it wanes. And so it just becomes, it's just sitting there, waiting. So, I guess I don't have a preference. I think we should be realistic in our expectations that we're not going to see anything in the immediate future. I'd be stunned if we did. And so, rather than have us go through the motions, if we have it listed on the development website as an available parcel of property, I think the reason that we've not put it up for sale to a realtor yet is because we were looking to move along the project that we picked. And for a while, the whole reason we assembled the parcels in the first place was to make sure that the project that ends up on that, because that property, even though it's got some access challenges, is really a gateway to downtown. And we wanted some input as to what that property becomes to make sure that that parcel is achieving its highest and best real estate use, and, not just becoming, another Quick Trip or something. Not that that's a bad example, but, we're looking for something that's unique and different. And I think through the RFP process, that's how we were trying to get there.
I agree. I think our, negotiating position, kind of falls out of the picture if we go through a realtor, it seems to me. Our ability to sell or give the land, is not something that would, look really attractive perhaps to a realtor who's going to be looking for, a good sale and good commission on the sale. So As to Alder Larson's point, certainly see the value because it's a high visibility location, putting up a sign saying that this property is available, and, with city contact information, there's another property for lease, just like that, block west of there, and they're using their big billboard, as an advertisement for that availability. So I do kind of myself like the idea of having an RFP out there because it's alive, even if it is not imminent, and it's not due in 60 or 90 or 120 days. At least it's out there, so if somebody does show interest, they're within the process already. So, thoughts on it, Alder Killian? Okay. Becky, I'm going to go to Alder Killian and then come to you. Okay? Alder Killian.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And speaking to Alder Rasmussen's point about it being a gateway property, I think to hammer in kind of full transparency there, this property, if I'm not mistaken, had been earmarked in a master plan that I think is present on an economic development site of the cities. It may be the near west side master plan or one of those, but I think the intention had been, I mean, this wasn't, the city didn't just pick this up by chance. I think the goal had been to purchase that property for many years, and it kind of strategically became sat on. But, I think we can certainly see that sometimes the risks outweigh the benefits of something like that, trying to choreograph the local economy. So I do agree, I think, with Alder Rasmussen's initial position that there is merit in waiting to put out the RFP. We're in a time of great uncertainty, namely a pandemic, and I'm not sure, even with an interest shown now, what the longevity of an operation, say in the dining and hospitality category would be these days, not knowing how the pandemic will unfold. So I'd probably be inclined to support waiting, and even ultimately, if the RFP process would not pan out, just trying the good old American free market. So thank you.
Thank you. Alder McElhenney.
Thank you. I guess, I don't believe that this has to be a restaurant area either. I actually hope it isn't. I think I would like, with Mr. Fitzgerald saying he's getting people, asking about it, I think we should, if we don't do an RFP, I would like to direct ED to make sure that any kind of interest, be it from any type of developer, and that is solid interest, be brought forward either to this committee or however the organizational chart makes these type of decisions. I just want to make sure that if we don't have an RFP, this can still go forward if he has somebody interested in it. That's all. Thanks.
Yes, I just don't know if that would be an arm's length sort of, process if somebody showed interest, but it wasn't really publicly stated as available again. That's why, to me, an open-ended RFP is, the process is potentially in place for anybody and everybody. And we don't have to, like I said, put a short tail on it, so. Alder Watson?
I guess, are there any cons to having it out there? Because I've heard before we don't have to accept RFPs, right? And
Right.
so if it's something that we don't think would be successful due to, COVID or pandemic, like we wouldn't have to accept it, but then we can see sort of what's going on.
I don't see a con, really. That's something that, compels me to say, no, we shouldn't do it. And I just, having it being out there and being alive, if you will, is better because to me, it's open. It's attainable to anybody who wants to come forward, rather than, it's shut off for 6 months,
So can you do the RFP and then, like you had mentioned, have some kind of sign or something out there saying this is
Sure.
available, to get it a little bit more visible?
Yeah. Anything else from the committee? Alder Killian?
I think
Pardon me, yes. I think Alder Watson makes a good point there. Maybe there's a hybrid scenario there. I think I'd be willing to support something like that. Thank you.
I would entertain a motion from the committee to kind of move this forward, because we would need to take action. Sure.
I move that we issue an RFP for the former West Side Battery at 415 South First Avenue, as well as indicate in signage on the property that it's available for development, to contact the city.
Very good, thank you. Do I have a second to that motion?
I'll second.
I have a second. Further discussion? We'll leave it open-ended for now. Alder Rasmussen?
Question, just to clarify, are we going to use the same RFP template that we released when the Dam Place project came forward? Because that, we did approve that RFP as satisfactory to offer up the property with when those proposals came in. I think we just removed the expiration date and maybe adjust it, for present-day dates and stuff, but it was pretty clear what we were trying to achieve there. Do we want to reapprove do we want to see the RFP that's going out before it goes out, I guess is my
It
question.
seems to me that, the RFP was, vetted, if you will, and it was in line with strategic goals and whatnot, so I don't know why it would be different, why we would alter it from, the form it was in. With regards to the...
I guess I'd like to hear from our two new members, because they weren't here last time when
Sure.
we did it.
Also, on the question of the end date, I think we probably should have one on there just for the sake of having it in a document. Let's just put it out there, though. I mean, we could have it for, March 30th or something, if that,
Yeah, why don't you have it at the end of the first quarter of 2021?
okay, there you go.
But the question about the RFP, is it like tailored to a specific industry, or like, I guess, I don't know
No.
what it looks like.
No,
It was pretty wide open. It just listed, the history of the site and some of its challenges and kind of what we were looking to do, and it had some deadlines. And I think they left it a little bit vague on purpose so people could get creative. But,
yeah. We've had interest from different sorts of businesses, not just, restaurant and brew pub, so.
Yeah.
Mr. Killian?
Thank you. On that RFP process that was solidified a while ago, will the vetting requirements be any different than they had been historically, or is that kind of a larger discussion on the approach to the RFPs in general?
I think, we would take a proposal on its own merits and discuss it in committee. Go
I
ahead.
think the developer, though, would have to pass our new vetting process. That requires some background checking and some
Sure.
financial information. And, we ask different questions on the applications at least on the application for assistance, we ask many different questions
Yeah.
than we used to ask. So we should certainly be clear that they would have to clear our new vetting process. And
You bet. Okay, further discussion from the committee? Seeing none, all in favor of the motion, please say aye.
I
Aye. Alder McElhenney?
Aye.
Thank you, and that's unanimous. Appreciate it. Moving on, item number 3, discussion and possible action on options for Phase 2 environmental testing at 1300 Cleveland Street, former city incubator property. Start us off there, Mr. Fitzgerald.
Sure. As we reported during the July 7th Economic Development Committee meeting, Public Works Director Eric Lindman had taken on the responsibility of evaluating some historical documents related to the property. He prepared a summary of his findings that he presented to the council and the mayor back in mid-July, and he's available tonight to discuss that further and answer any questions from the committee. He's also provided with that some options, some suggested options for consideration from the committee as well. So, Mr. Lindman?
Mr. Lindman, thank you for the work you've been doing and your recommendations and whatnot. And curious to hear what you have tonight.
Yeah, so I tried to summarize some of the significant information, from the laundry list of data from the DNR and what the city had on file. And so hopefully that was much more manageable for you to read and understand. That was kind of the goal anyway, try to break that down. Obviously, there was a lot of practices at that site. And really, the documentation didn't start until the 70s. And so, before that, we're unsure on everything that happened. But There were practices that were not in compliance with regulations. The DNR was heavily involved with that site over the years. There was a lot of testing that was done, I guess in my opinion, some investigation that was done throughout that site. That site was significantly larger at the time, so some of that property we don't own anymore, so where some of the work was done. So on our existing map that's in there, I've tried to outline the best I could on what work was done in the past and the locations of that work, and then also maybe where some, some potential verification of testing might be beneficial if the committee is, a bit uncertain if there was anything. I guess some of the things that I saw in the documentation that would be significant would be the heavy metals, the potential for heavy metals that were dumped on the ground. And so I think it would be good to have verification that, the majority of those heavy metals were removed. I think the other thing is the VOCs, from any solvents or anything like that that were used. That we not only test the fill material on that site, but we go to the below that fill material and the natural soils there and maybe test that as well. And I guess, I don't know if the committee has any specific questions or on anything that was presented.
One question I have just off the bat, have we further clarity on the indemnification question? We don't have a city attorney with us tonight. Where that stands at this point?
I haven't had any conversations with the attorney on that, so I can't respond to that,
Okay.
what that looks like or legally, so.
Okay, Alder Rasmussen.
Thank you. First, Eric, thank you for distilling this all down into a much more user-friendly format because it was really helpful. That said, he did come back with at least 3 options that we could consider here tonight. And then subsequent to that, Alder Killian has done a ton of work as well, more than any council member should have ever had to try to trace the trail and figure out what else might be wrong here and what needs to happen. And so thank you for that. That was many, many hours. And, the history of the site is the entire reason that I think we are reluctant to move it forward for anything because there was so much that we didn't know. I feel like at the very least, we need to do some testing. So in the memo that we got from Director Lindman, option 1 is basically do no testing and secure a hold harmless from whoever buys it. 2 was do some initial borings for, roughly $10,000 in the site that was proposed for development by the parties that responded, see what's out there. And then 3 is test the entire site. And, then in Alder Killian's memo, he identified a few other things, that may be of concern to us, especially things that happen with 3M fill and the colorants that were used in 3M fill and the compounds that come from that, as well as these glues and solvents and things that the wood plant put out. And so I feel like the least we have to do is option 2. But, depending on what we want to see there in terms of a project, if we're looking at, like one of the proposals that came in was a housing type project, and we were not real excited about that because of the history of the site. But if we were to consider something like that going forward, we would want to know as much as we could know about the site to make sure that it was safe to reuse for a purpose like that. And yet, one of the other proposals that came in was going to, basically build on top and not have a basement and not, all that stuff. So, those couple of projects that came forward, maybe they're less risky, but I feel like doing nothing isn't enough. You can't just sell something that has a history like this and go, well, buyer beware. Because I feel like we would not be a responsible seller.
Right.
So,
And the option 2, to me, seems reasonable because it's based on identified, probable hot spots, if you will, suspect areas.
well, and with that option too, you could probably add a couple more. If there were
Sure.
other areas,
Yeah.
that beyond his 5 or 6 that he picked.
Option 3 might have a certain element of randomness to it, and then, that's fine, but, the price tag would have to go through, be approved by finance committee, and, the difference between 10,000 and 60,000 is $50,000. So,
Good news is that the Finance Committee identified a few meetings ago that there's funding that we might be able to tap into from the
Okay.
Holtz-Krause Fund to cover some of this stuff. And so that, that was knowledge that we didn't have in the past, that's good to know now.
and, that pot of money, if you will, is something that is good to have. And, to me, it's also important to, allot it out to make sure you don't, just use it up,
Well, right, we could have
so-
other areas that need help too, but, I
Yeah.
mean, I feel like we got to do more
Alder
than
Watson.
nothing. So,
I think I would side more with option 3, and like you said, the Holtz-Krause funding, I mean, that's what this is for, right? I mean, and I don't know, I don't think it seems as random, and it's more complete. And I guess my other question was, like, the one project, the community center, has anything changed, or have you contacted, like, Mr. Fitzgerald, have you talked to them, the service thing?
Yeah, community developments continue to be in touch with all the proposers for the property, just to let them know, first and foremost, that there wasn't going to be any development moving forward until this committee had decided what it wants to do with the testing, and then do the testing, and then if there was any remediation required after the testing, having that done. With the Community Partners Campus, that's been even more of a special circumstance. I think we were charged, both by this committee and the mayor, to work with that group to identify some alternative locations. And so we've, in fact, Ann Worth, who is back with community development for a brief stint here, she and I have been spending quite a bit of time with the principals for that project, looking at alternative properties. And while they are not ruling out 1300 Cleveland at this point, I think it'd be fair to say it's not a priority property for them. They've identified some other properties that they're a bit more eager about at this point.
And then if we did go with one of these options tonight, it would have to go to finance, right? And then how long would the testing take and results and all that?
We would send out an RFP, try to delineate out exactly what we wanted and what type of testing we wanted. That would probably be out for 2 to 3 weeks, and then we get proposals back, and those would be opened at the Board of Public Works, and then a selection made, and we move ahead at that point. So we might get testing and stuff in the ground around the October, November timeframe, the samples taken. Yep.
and then maybe a few weeks for results, 3, 4?
Yeah, I would say 3 to 4 weeks for the results, and then another couple of weeks for analysis and write-up and summary and things like that. But we could get the results in 3 to 4 weeks.
So it could be January before we really know?
Correct, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Alder Killian.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And this, of course, has been a long-standing important issue in my neighborhood and district, so I will have kind of some questions and comments at length tonight. I'd like to say that I think it's my understanding that Mr. Lindman was tasked with looking at this through an economic development lens. I think that's what he and I had talked about, and I think from that perspective, it was a really well-done job. Now, outside of that, however, this property, and in the memo I sent today and some of the things we had discussed yesterday, I guess I'm not aware of anything in the memo I sent to my colleagues today, or that we had discussed yesterday, that is factually incorrect. And I think based on that, if something would be brought to the table that, hey, these issues were resolved, we just had some data gaps, I think they could be crossed off the list. And I think one thing that's become both a challenge and an opportunity for this committee is that we're the Economic Development Committee. We're not an environmental committee. And so perhaps initially the priority had been economic development, but because this very important and notorious site is now in our responsibility, and it's our responsibility to shepherd an investigation which is comprehensive and rather exhaustive, then I think it would make sense, and I think the administration may agree with me on this, that we kind of decouple the effort on environmental investigation from just an exclusive economic development perspective. And what I mean from that is, even though this is a property that we're dealing with from an economic development standpoint, the priority for this property, now that we have the ability to test it after kind of decades of shortcomings, should really be making sure that we do a thorough job based on the documentation. And there are two things I'd recommend there that I think really dovetail well. One would be leveraging the Public Works Director's memo and findings, and to make sure that we hit those. There have been some locations identified and some potential pollutants, and I think that all makes really good sense. But then we know from the documentation in the memo I provided today that there's nothing factually refuted on several important items that aren't in that memo, and they're just not in there in Mr. Lindman's memo because he wasn't tasked with doing that, and I respect that. This would be kind of outside the scope of the pure economic development perspective. We have identified a culvert discharge area finally, which syncs with the city's utility maps. That had been a concern of a city employee around 1986, although she was not able to locate that. We've now located that. The above-ground storage tanks appear to pose a much greater problem than we may have anticipated before. And that is because in 1994, although there was some remediation when they found some pollutants leaking out and they excavated quite a bit of soil there, I think, and Mr. Lindman and I had talked about this, the actual above-ground storage tanks appear to be farther north than some of that excavation. And they had identified through both soil vapor tests that are in my memo as well as laboratory tests that there were VOCs in the vicinity of those ASTs, and that was never dealt with. But even, I'll just give you a no-brainer, when they were trying to hand auger that area to test it, they couldn't at multiple points because there was such a hard layer of solidified lacquer or glue resin, they couldn't even hand auger the soil to test it. So, I mean, this just becomes kind of, in my opinion, hey, we know this, maybe we should address it, and that's an easy one. And then there are some other things that are similar in the memo, which, as far as I know, are not factually refuted in any way that I'm aware of. So if perhaps we could couple what the nice job the Public Works Director has done with these things we now know to be documented fact, none of it's anecdotal, as you can see by the diagrams I've included, then I think we'd be kind of taking a good step forward there. And then the last thing would be on that, the budgetary component, the fiscal component. I know Mr. Alder Neal has worked in marketing and branding. There are many business people in the room that, setting a finite budget at the onset to define the services needed, often that can be quite problematic. I think if we identify what the necessary and desired services and components are, then perhaps get an RFP going and see some proposed costs, then we would be able to, I think, narrow down the cost and budget. But I think just saying 10K, I think there's very few that are familiar with this site outside of the economic development realm that would think that would be realistic. And then we do have a fund to deal with that. So there's one item in my memo that if we do an RFP such as I've described, if we could break out a line item on a geophysical investigation, because perhaps that's not necessary, but with the buried drums that were excavated from the site, I think if it would be possible to get a light item estimate on what that would cost for the area designated on the map, perhaps if we had that cost, then when that came in, the committee could say, hey, we really don't need that, or based on the data, that makes a lot of sense. But I think if we could decouple the environment from the development and really hit this comprehensively, I think that would be very positive. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Lindman, had you had a chance to see this afternoon's memo? I mean, I had not had a chance either. I mean, it came out an hour before our meeting. it seems to me this is information that, belongs, within the realm of your summary and, your cost estimates and that sort of thing, so.
Sure.
Are we looking at something in today's memo? Have you read it, by the way?
Yeah, I
Okay.
have. Yeah.
Do you see anything here that, would make you alter your summaries and recommendations in any way? Do you think that
I mean,
we can move forward, like, let's say, option 3, and encompass what we're looking at here?
Yeah, no, I don't see anything. I thought Tom did a good job summarizing that. We met yesterday as well on site, and so, we kind of walked the site in different areas and his thoughts and information and stuff, so, I'm happy to incorporate that along with mine. Now, the costs that I gave you, those are, just based on some other projects, they could be up or down. I
Sure.
guess the idea wasn't that these, that option 2 will cost 10,000, that's just
It's
kind
an
of a
estimate,
ballpark.
yeah.
Could be more, could be less, and.
Okay.
I think the other thing that Tom and I talked about too is, he had promoted doing some groundwater testing there as well. And I mean, I don't have any issue doing it. I mean, as far as, we know the groundwater in that area is contaminated, so we know that, that's an issue. I think Tom's idea was that maybe we could test for certain things and then maybe see if that would have come from CFI. And so, and I had said, well, we're probably boring down to close to groundwater depth, so maybe we can incorporate that as well. So I don't think it's necessary for the development of the
Right.
site, but if you wanted a comprehensive plan, that might be something we could.
Problem there is pinpointing, source.
Right.
Okay. Alder McElhenney had her hand up. Go ahead.
Thank you. I'm just trying to wrap my head around, what we're trying to do. So I agree that option 3, so we can, when we put this up for RFP, and if it isn't, we have 2 other developers still maybe in the mix that are wanting this or are still interested, but it isn't CPC developers were very like, I want it, we want to start it now, we want to open, that's where we were going. If they are now just not as nervous or not as, this is our first choice, I think we should do option 3, but I guess I have some questions as to, again, Eric, if we do what Tom wants to do, is that going to be all-encompassing enough? And number 2 is, if we find something, okay, let's say we do with all this testing, what's next then? Is it more testing? I just don't want to get on this merry-go-round. I want to make sure that we have kind of an end game too of what we need to do. I know remediation would be the end game, but I'd like to know, if option 3 comes back and there's some positives, what would be the next step?
Yeah, so, I mean, if there were detects that came back, we would take a look at those. Obviously, we'd share them with the DNR. If they were exceedances, the DNR is going to direct us what to do. If we can relate that back to CFI, then there's another protocol, and the DNR might open up the site again as far as its number, as far as a contaminated site. I don't know what that looks like. But really, once we get into contamination, we are the owner of the property, and so then the DNR will determine, what the next steps are. So we would just follow their process, and which would more than likely include additional testing and then potential remediation at some point. So, and that's a longer process.
Alder Rasmussen.
Thank you. If anything, I think this site really should serve as an example. And this is, for a number of years, I've been talking about why in our new zoning code, we don't put industry and neighborhoods tight together. This is why. And now, environmental practices and industrial practices are better than they've ever been as far as, the things that people are allowed to or willing to release into the environment. But if we rewind to when these properties were occupied for industrial purposes, people either didn't know or didn't care, and they did appalling things. They dumped things, they buried things. I mean, and this isn't the first site in town where we've had problems like this. And so, luckily now, I mean, maybe not luckily now, we happen to be the owner, but, it feels like, you can't keep kicking the can down the road. And, I think, like I said before, we need to be responsible sellers. And so, if through a hybrid approach using Alder Killian's proposal and Director Lindman's, that we can get option 3 together. If the 60,000 figure is just a ballpark, just putting my finance hat on for a minute, if we were going to go to the finance committee with a testing recommendation or an RFP release recommendation and ask to tap into some of the Holtz-Krause fund, we would certainly go forward with the recognition that, a rough estimate of the cost is, somewhere between 60 and 75,000 or whatever it would be, with the understanding on the front end that that's not a firm number. So you don't go to an environmental firm and say, what can I get for the money I have? You say, here's what I want to test for, and if it turns out that it's 10% more than that, come back and we'll adjust our numbers. But, I don't think that we have to feel like we're locked into either 10 or 60. If it's 15 or 70, we'll figure it out.
Sure.
But I think that, going forward, if the committee feels like it wants to do option 3 and get a little broader picture of what's happening there, the hold harmless agreement or the indemnification between the city and CFI is amazingly simplistic. I mean, when we see contracts like that today, they're 80 pages in length. This is a letter that 2 people signed, and they're all probably gone or dead. So, it just, I wonder about what the enforceability is of a document of that age with that
Right.
simplicity.
Right.
And, will we be able to, even if you tie it back to CFI, maybe DNR is better than we are at holding people's feet to the fire, but, I think that while we may want to see, the whole reason that we ever talked about developing this parcel is because Mayor Milky was committed to returning the property that the city was sitting on to the tax rolls. And so he sent Director Schock out with the directive of unloading property that we're sitting on that's developable. And of course, Chris didn't know. He just offered them up. And so here we are. But for 40 years prior to that, we had no interest in developing 1300 Cleveland. And none of us had any great urgency in seeing that become anything. I doubt that it's, environmentally, it's probably not the worst site in town. The worst site in town could be across the street. But that doesn't mean that we should assume that this one is, ready for anything. So, I think maybe our next step is to send a recommendation for whatever level of testing we want to the Finance Committee, ask for approval to get some of that Holtz-Krause funding, at least to get this testing started. And then we'll consider that on whatever finance agenda the request is ready for. That meets twice a month.
Okay, would you like to put that in the form of a motion?
Okay, so we'll see if we all agree. I guess I will move that we pursue option 3 from Director Lindman's memo, which includes soil borings throughout the entire site, taken down to groundwater, and the proposal says at least 3 groundwater samples as well. And then we would send a recommendation to the Finance Committee requesting that funding be appropriated through the Holtz-Krause Fund for that effort.
Okay, thank you. Do I have a second to that?
Pardon me, a parliamentary question, Mr. Chair. If I were to amend or add something to that motion, would I wait until it got a second perhaps, or do I make that motion before that?
I think you can make a motion to amend that
Well, you could just ask
motion.
for a friendly amendment, and maybe I'll just include it. Maybe that's easier. What was it?
Thank you.
What did I miss?
No, I think it was excellent. There was just one thing I was hoping in the motion it could incorporate kind of the set of things that I included with my memo, other than the geophysical investigation, which could maybe be a question later on, because everything else, the groundwater and soil, it's covered in Mr. Lindman's option 3, but just to make sure that kind of covers the bases on the list I had provided, I think that would be very positive if that's possible.
I would include that in my motion, because I was particularly interested in his memo of the findings with 3M fill and, the presence of hexavalent chromium and things like that were used to color shingles. So
Okay,
definitely.
great. Do I have a second to this motion? I have a second from Mr. Killian. Further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor of the motion, please say aye.
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 Aye. Alder
Aye.
McElhaney? Okay,
Aye.
thank you. All right, very good. Good discussion. Moving on. Discussion and possible action on proposals received for the development in the River Life area. Mr. Fitzgerald.
All right. The committee had asked Community Development to put out an RFP for the River Life area back in June. I think it is a June 2nd meeting. And that RFP deadline was on Friday, just this past Friday, July 31st, at the end of the day. And as you can imagine, it was an unfortunate choice of a deadline because of this meeting being held in the fourth year. It didn't really allow a lot of time for the proposals that were presented to be summarized, vetted by staff, and then given to you for consideration. The one proposal that we are introducing tonight did come in a day before the deadline. It was put together by it was put together collaboratively by two developers who had previously submitted proposals for this same property, and in that regard, they both have made some adjustments to address the concerns that the committee had previously. It's being brought forward tonight as an introduction, really, of this proposal. There are some questions that remain yet still, and I imagine the committee will have some questions about those tonight. But ultimately, it's a collaborative proposal from Cherry Tree Dental, and Jack Young is here tonight to describe that project and answer any questions the committee has. It was done in collaboration with Jason Blanker and his residential construction company. The two projects in total $4.7 million, and will be done, each developer will develop their own parcel or their own part of the project separately. Jason Blanker is available on WebEx this evening to answer any questions as well that the committee might have.
Very good. Thank you, Mr. Fitzgerald. It was good to see a collaborative effort come forward with a residential component as well. I don't think we're at a point where we can take any action tonight because, there are further embellishments to, the proposal that we would have to see and consider. But I would welcome Mr. Young to come forward and say anything to the committee and kind of, give us some background or lay the groundwork for your thoughts.
Yeah, you bet. Thank you. Thank you, committee, for hearing the proposal again. Before I start, I just want to recognize Dr. David Eicher and Dr. Wen Sun, are two of the dentists in working with Cherry Tree Dental, both owners of Cherry Tree Dental, and together with Dr. Fred Prane, have been practicing downtown Wausau for well over 50 years combined. That's what we're looking to try to perpetuate. The committee took a prior proposal and reviewed that, provided some good feedback on some points of improvement. We took those seriously. I've outlined those in the proposal, but just to hit on those briefly, there was a large degree of interest for a multi-use facility. We looked at that, we considered that, and speaking with our dentists, it just is a little bit inconsistent with the medical facility that they and their patients are accustomed to working within. Co-locating or constructing a restaurant or some kind of food service thing next to the healthcare facility wasn't something necessarily that was of interest or in our capability of doing. And really, that's where the genesis of working together with the Blanker companies came from and wanting to put together kind of a coordinated proposal. And I think between the two proposals, we're still using the same amount of land that was originally requested, and now working on a collaborative effort here to bring some of the, not quite a multi-use single building site, but a multi-use site to the riverfront area. The look and feel of the building, we really are very willing to work with the committee and the city with how that should look. I think the rendering that was provided in the initial proposal was one of our prior facilities, which was built in a more suburban location. But, I think you guys would appreciate and understand our interest is on the internal functionality of the building and less concerned necessarily with the outside. So we'll work with whomever to find a look and feel, coordinate colors with the residential group that's there as well, if that is of interest. So there'll be a path forward for us to make this look and match the surrounding downtown area. We backed off on some of the parking load that was designed for the facility. There was also a recognition that the first thing you see when you walk up to First and Fulton was parking lot. So we've moved back, from that, so that now the residence now occupies that kind of that visible corner, and parking is now behind those structures, and actually having some additional information from the city regarding the grades of that site, have been able to sink the parking lot actually sinks down a few feet from the sidewalk level, so it's even further, from a visibility perspective, reduced. And we've also reduced the number to what would be kind of our minimum load that we could go to from a parking load perspective. And then also on the comment, the financial ask was a little excessive. We backed off on that. Our interest is in obviously the land, but just if there's anything else inherent in the site that requires additional development or additional expense, we're asking for the city to contribute towards that up to a certain amount of the project.
Thank you. And I do appreciate, you and your partners taking our initial recommendations or questions to heart and coming back with some new information. Anybody from the committee? With Alder Rasmussen.
Thank you. I've got just a couple questions. So with the revised proposal, you're still looking, though, at a single-use, single-occupancy structure for the clinic. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. And so, and then when we talk about financial assistance, in any area that's tax increment funded, the first developments in take the greatest risks because they're new and they are sort of alone until other things start to happen. Now, the riverfront, in especially this area that this is in, the first phase of the riverfront, is in full swing and it is successful. So, that begs the question, at what point do we stop incentivizing? Riverfront property is prime real estate and it's highly sought after. So this isn't land you have to give away. And, everything that's been built on it is leasing up quick. So, and then when we talk about site challenges, whether it's soils or footings or whatever it might be, I also look at land use. Is this the highest and best land use for riverfront property, which is a finite commodity for us? We only have so much riverfront property, and, there are literally dozens of sites in the city of Wausau that would accommodate, with no site challenges whatsoever, a professional office building. And so, if we were to participate in a public-private partnership on a project using land that's in short supply, is this the project? And I feel like that's what we have to ask ourselves. Whether we ask ourselves that in closed session or not is up to the committee, but, those are just the concerns that I have that go around in my mind. Is this the one? Because when we look at the riverfront development, at some point, we are out of land, and the projects that we are going to consider, that phase is over. And when we go back there and look at that, did we use it to its best possible potential? And I want to be able to answer yes on all of those things. And so, for me, a single-use building, a single-use professional office, receiving a public-private partnership incentive when that same occupancy could take flight in other areas without the same challenges, is that a good use of tax increment? And so that's what I wrestle with. As far as the aesthetics of the building, we would certainly want it to have an urban vibe and urban aesthetics to match, everything else that's happening on the riverfront. But, that's just what I have to weigh when I try to make this decision as far as whether this project is the one for that site. And that goes double for the Blinker Housing Project. We have a number of proposals from them to consider in all over town. Is
Right.
that what we want? We've not decided that yet.
Well, frankly, in this particular area that we're talking about, our focus for years has been one of building a community with considerations towards density and dynamics, diversity, and not, closing off, turning off the lights at 5 o'clock, that sort of thing. Now, part of that community certainly can be a dental clinic. There's no question about that. But a standalone dental clinic, the question that Alder Rasmussen brings up is very valid. Does it resonate with, the strategic vision that has been had for that, property for years now? And certainly the question of city participation really, comes into question too. Because, if something was sort of designed for a particular reason with a particular vision in mind, then shouldn't you continue to try to seek, ways to make that come to fruition? So, I was glad to see the residential, component, come forward, but I would have been way much happier, just between you and me and everybody else that's listening, to, see like a couple of floors of apartments up above a clinic, that's the kind of density, and diversity that we're kind of banking on having down there to build something really special in a very limited footprint. So that's our dilemma, if you will. I hope you kind of understand our concerns along those lines. Anything else from the committee?
Would you be asking for action on this tonight or not yet?
Oh, absolutely not.
Okay,
no.
so we got another meeting or so to
Yeah,
mull this
we don't have
over?
elevations, and there's questions about, there was a question about possible, some sub-level parking, which that have to be hashed out, and dollars attached to it, and is that a city participation question or not? These are things that would have to, go back to staff and proposers.
Right.
But I'd love to hear from others in the committee along the lines that I and Alder Rasmussen have been expounding on
Just a
here.
quick follow-up question. Have our city planners viewed this plan, and have they weighed in with an opinion?
Brad Lenz had an opportunity. Brad Lenz had an opportunity to view it just at the end of the day Friday. He's unfortunately unavailable this week and,
Okay.
and gone on vacation. He, not having any, visual of the actual building design, he didn't have an opportunity to weigh in on that. But he did find, obviously the fact that the site is more densely
Right.
populated than it had been, that
When we
was,
get to decision time on this, his opinion is going to be, I think, critical for us to hear, whether that's in the packets or in open, or in closed session or whatever, but I really, really want him to review it and weigh in with a thought, because the planning of this whole thing has been his,
yeah.
his effort.
And he has indicated that this would require Plan Commission approval as well.
Indeed.
At some point.
Okay.
Sure, Mr. Blanker is on phone, and sir, go ahead and speak when you're ready.
Thank you. I guess I'd just like to talk a little bit about the residential piece of this project for discussion. Our original proposal much fell in line with what the original concept that the city of Wausau came up with and put out for RFP, a couple of years ago. So I guess we were just following in line with what the original intent and the vision for that entire property was, and not, I guess, deviating a lot from what was originally presented, because I guess our assumption was that was what the vision of the committee was at the time, and maybe that has changed, and if so, we certainly would take another look at, our portion of that proposal and adjust that and modify that along the lines if that vision now has changed to any degree.
Thank you, sir. The residential component, if I'm correct, included four units, was it?
Correct. 4 units on each side of the intersection there. Yes, with drive-under garages. We actually have 2-car garages, so theoretically, we really probably don't need any additional parking, but we have accommodated a small amount of additional parking in the rear for guests and things like that. But each unit would have a 2-car drive-under garage for their unit as well.
All right. So, I did allude there a little bit earlier about the question of density, something that we're, trying to achieve. We're not trying to, cram everything possible down there, but it is a finite footprint. And, from a plan perspective, I'd be interested to know how this impacts our potentials, elsewhere in the area. What are we, narrowing it down to in terms of other available square footage, if you will, for the kinds of things that we're talking about achieving. So, I don't have that information in front of me right now, but I'm sure Mr. Lentz would elaborate on that. But, yeah, I mean, my first, feeling is a sense of perhaps not the density that I would have asked for, to build a sense of community down there. Four homes versus, 16 or 28 is a lot different in my mind. I don't know that, you've considered that sort of density, but, we are looking at building something down there that is more of an organic community, if you will, and want to have that sort of activity going on down there. So, anything else from the committee? Oh, go ahead, Mr. Blanker.
I guess to address the point, on the rear of this building, it's basically a 3-story building, and given the footprint of land available, depending on how high you'd want to go, certainly you could go 4, 5, 6, 8 stories high if you wanted to. It's just a matter of, certainly density on the site, but that building takes up the majority of the site available. It's also a little bit different product, I guess, than what is currently down there in terms of, these are a little bit higher end type single family units blended together in a townhome type format rather than an apartment complex or an apartment building. So we were trying to get a little bit of diversity from what is existing and what is going to be coming down there to be able to offer a variety of products within that, within that same development area, to have that kind of mix of product available, mix of income levels, mix of square footage and things like that. So that's kind of where our head was at when we designed and developed the plans for that, was to offer something that isn't currently available down there, but yet in fitting kind of with the original concept and the original plan that the city of Wausau had kind of put together for that whole area.
Sure. Alder Rasmussen.
Thank you. I struggle with the design on this one a little bit, just because when I view it from the front and the back, I agree with the height and I agree with the underground parking portion, but, when I look at the design of this one, especially on the back, which I assume is, well, the garages is the river side. So it has an awful lot of little pieces and jut outs and dormers, and it's just, to me, I struggle with the design aesthetics of this one because to me, it looks like a house, a standard house that has been opened up in a couple of different ways, and the lines are like it's trying to be a house, but it's trying to be urban. It's not, it doesn't look like, I guess my example for high-density riverfront housing is the River Life apartment complex. It's got an urban shape, it's got a different mix of materials, it's got clear vertical lines, it's just got a different urban look, and I struggle a little bit with the nature of the design on this one, and I like the mix of materials. I love the mix of materials on the 3rd Street townhouses as an example, but those have a consistent look. And, this, if it's out there kind of by itself with 4 units, the design elements on it are difficult. I'm looking for something different. I'm not sure what it is, but I'm not confident that this is it.
Well, if we go back to, some of the pie in the sky usage renderings that we looked at years ago, there was an element of, the higher profile apartments by the river, but over towards River Street, it was more there was availability of like row houses. But it was a stretch of them, to become now another sort of like little mini community. rather than, this is kind of like, yeah, it's kind of a standalone sort of house kind of feel. So, I mean, perhaps that's what you're struggling with, Alder Rasmussen, is, that memory of, what was envisioned over here was something a bit more, with more to it.
Yep, I think that's why I'm wanting to hear from the city planner, because I think his vision dovetails with the committee's vision, and I'm not sure that this design fits the vision. I like the idea of a four-townhome type concept, but I'm looking for something different in the design. It's not the height, it's the aesthetics on the outside. And, this
Okay.
looks like little, like pieces that have been joined together to me when I look at the front and the back of this building. And it just, there's not enough uniformity. And, it's just, I don't know, I would be reluctant to, this one needs some more work, I guess, is what I'm saying. So if the entire project is coming back to us for future consideration, that's the only feedback I can give. Because it looks like it's trying too hard to be urban from the outside.
Anything else from the committee on this? Oh, Mr. Young, go ahead.
So I hope the committee can recognize this is a bit of a frustrating process, I think.
Oh, sure.
And probably Jason would, maybe, because I'm not going to speak for him. I have a strong sense we have no idea what we're shooting for. There's elements of planning, what I would think would be planning committee charter conversation going on here rather than what is an economic development type of opportunity. The tax base associated with what we're going to be contributing to that area, I think, hasn't even come up. The economic impact of this kind of business and the traffic that we would provide to the downtown area hasn't come up. So I guess, I don't even know, I thought the RFPs were due the 31st to be discussed on the 4th, and I'm not even sure what the decision timeframe is right now for these. So,
well, yeah,
I'd
but-
really like some guidance, I guess, from
Sure.
the committee, if I could, on what we need to do next to either get a
I-
yay or a nay on what we're trying to do.
Yeah. There's no decision forthcoming tonight, other than I'm sure we're going to be encouraging staff to get back with you, and probably Mr. Lentz to be, part of that discussion too, to come back to us with a more fleshed out, thing. I mean, we don't have elevations on your building and that kind of thing. So, and there are some outstanding questions about participation and parking and whatnot. So, I mean, with staff and you guys working those out and coming back then with a more nip and tuck proposal, then I think we would be closer to that ability to take action. I thought I saw your hand, Mr. Killian.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, I would just wonder if those involved, some of the concerns that my colleagues mentioned this evening, if this is at kind of an embryonic phase where it would be possible to make some modification to the aesthetics or the certain occupancy factors, do you think that's a possibility for you? And then secondly, one thing, and I think you mentioned some important factors with economic development and in terms of potential ROI in the long run and so forth. And, some of the frustrations, I think, of having government involved in business is that government component. And one thing that would be really important for me, or that I'd really like to hear about in the near future that would impact my decision, would be kind of on the public purpose front. I think if you could share maybe some information with the committee, if it's possible, on, given the dental profession and so forth, I'm sure this would be of benefit to children and senior citizens in the community and nearby the downtown. So I think the ROI, in addition to perhaps being able to make some of the modifications that might be a concern tonight, I think the ROI factor would be important to me, as well as, since there will be city cooperation, just the public purpose aspect of this, and I think a narrative on how this would really positively impact perhaps dentistry and health in the downtown area. That would be something that I'd be eager to see and would probably positively impact my decision. Thank you.
Alder Rasmussen?
Thank you. I guess just for clarity, and I can see where this process is frustrating, but, and it's frustrating because the government nature of it, the wheels of government, we know turn painfully slow, but they still turn. But that said, and here's where I come down on the incentive part. And so any incentive that we're going to give is funded with tax increment funding, and it by nature has to pass what's called a but-for test. And what that means is that but for a public and private partnership, the project cannot happen, cannot take flight. And so if you ask me if a proposal like this could fund itself and succeed on its own, I would have to say yes. Because there are so many other sites in the city where this would prosper with no challenges. There's not, this is the same trouble I had with incentives for Wausau Smiles. It doesn't pass the but-for test. If a project can fund itself and be self-sustaining, but just because other projects in the area have received a TID incentive of between 5 and 10%, that doesn't mean that they all could or should. And so that's where I struggle with the decision on this. And that's where, it's, the perception shouldn't be out there in the business community that says, Wausau has free land for sale and Wausau's giving everything away for $1. Wausau gives away sites that make sense. And we sell sites for $1 that makes sense when the return on investment is huge. And the reason the economics of this project haven't come up in terms of taxable value or job creation is because they're not in question. We know they'll hire people. We know people will work there. We know that there's going to be patient and employee traffic created around it. But other projects do that too. And that's where I have to ask myself, is this the one? And does this one pass that but-for test? And so when I read about the project, this and the housing project, my first inclination is that they may not. And so that's the incentive part of it. That's where my decision is going to come down to is it a true necessity? Or are we just following the fact that everyone else down there has gotten land for $1 and gotten, help with things like footings and whatnot? So that's where, it may be frustrating, but that's where I'm viewing this from.
Thank you, and it's an issue that's come up time and time again over the years, and it's kind of unavoidable, too. Alder Killian.
I think Alder Rasmussen makes some interesting points, and I think the but-for component with TIF, I think that would make for a very good future discussion. And if the but-for is limited to pure fiscal components, or if the but-for can also apply to developments that would not have occurred due to certain land locations and so forth. So I'd like to have a more in-depth assessment of what the but-for covers. And then, well, I do agree that that should always be heeded. I have, had a kind of a challenge in the past seeing that it has been heated, and I've never seen something, in terms of plans or districts that have gone to the Joint Review Board and not been stamped. In fact, I don't know of one, and that's not just for particular projects, of course, that's just in general. So yes, I'd like to know more, I think, about the aspects of but-for, and if that can apply to more than fiscal involvement, and that could, who knows, perhaps play a role in this. Thank you.
Very good. Anything else from the committee? Anything else from our guests? Well, as I said, what we're encouraging to happen here is an ongoing discussion with staff and the proposers. Bearing in mind again, and I thank you again for considering our previous comments and concerns and coming back in an effort to address them. And we're, looking forward to that process continuing and hopefully coming to a point where, decision-making is easy, or relatively easy. So, okay.
Will you get back to me with next steps? 'Cause I'm
Sure.
real quick.
Yeah, that's the direction. Yeah,
Thank you, Commissioner.
very good. Thank you. I appreciate you coming too. Thank you. Okay, number 5 on our agenda, update, discussion, and possible action on the issuance of a request for proposal, RFP, for 120 Scott Street. Mr. Fitzgerald.
120 Scott Street is a property that, I believe it, my understanding, I think it was up for RFP in 2019. There was a proposal that came forward from Merge Urban Development out of Iowa. They had been given an option on the property. That option did expire on June 30th, but there were some continuing conversations with community development staff, and the mayor had been involved in that as well. After some further conversations later in July, Merge had made a decision to not go forward with the project at this point. And similar to the conversation we held before, there's, I guess, a desire for the committee to have a discussion on whether or not we put this property out for RFP once again.
So we're having another possible RFP discussion. Alder Rasmussen.
Thank you. This one kind of follows the same as 415 South First Avenue. I mean, is this the time? And, do you want a rolling, open-ended, site available type vibe with offering up the property? Maybe. That said, I'm glad though, and this is, one of the things that we have talked about before in the committee is, I've been asked by citizens, are there projects that your committee ever says no to? And absolutely. But also, I think our staff team, our development team on staff does a good job of vetting stuff before it gets to the committee so that we don't have as many of those no's. So this is an example. If a project comes in and it's a great-looking project, but it wants 20% assistance, they know that the numbers of that will never make sense to us. So at that point, they have to just agree to disagree and move on, and Merge pulled out. I think that's the smartest possible decision. And so a lot of times what people who watch our meetings don't always understand is that there's stuff that ends up on the cutting room floor before it ever gets here because it's not ready for prime time. And I feel like that's one of those. We like the appeal or the vibe of what they were trying to create there, but we don't want to participate at a level like that on a housing project. We just can't. And so I'm glad to see that, the site's again available. I mean, same thing happened with the hotel that wanted to build down there. They wanted a ton of money, taxpayer-funded assistance, and it was just too much to bear. And that ended up on the cutting room floor.
And it was hotel mixed with some retail and
Right.
street-level retail.
And so there has to be a top end with what we're willing to incentivize and what impact that has on the competitive market for everyone that's in the same business that we did not incentivize. And what kind of monster does that create? So, this particular site right now is a pretty useful parking lot. I mean, at some point, McDevco and some of our partners are probably going to want to see us turn it into something else. And I think that the tower across the street would like to see it be something else. But, I think that we shouldn't rush that timeline because if we had taken, if we rewind 20 years, if we had taken the first project that came along at First and Scott, we wouldn't have the Dudley Tower. We would have had some vinyl-sided apartments. And so I think sometimes there's a benefit to waiting. And so on this, I mean, it's a parking lot and people use it. Do we need to repropose it right now? I mean, in the case of 415 North First, it's got no purpose right now, but this 120 Scott is in use, and it's serving a public purpose for now.
Well, again, I do see value in not just having it go off the market per se. I like being able to welcome interest within, the confines of a process. I don't see any rush aspect to it if we don't have an imminent, due date for responses. This is a very dynamic site in terms of, the tower across the street and a possible another one, kitty corner, the future of parking ramp and whatnot. These are all sort of interrelated or impacting each other type, considerations. Anybody that wants to come forward for 120 Scott has to look at a really big picture and a long-term picture at that. So it's not going to be a rush, but I would like, I'd rather it were still on the market. Yes, it's a parking lot, but it doesn't have to be that forever. But this at least puts it in play for possible development. And, we are in the middle of a pandemic which is affecting a lot of maybe more short-term decisions. But this is a very strategic, longer-term decision. And I think that, having it out there on the market per se is something we should consider. Anything else from the committee? Yes, Mayor, thank you.
I've been thinking a lot about this with these RFPs and, the proposals we're getting. And I wonder if it would be good for this committee to think about what we want there in conjunction with the planners. If we throw a worm on our hook and throw it in there, we might get a couple of things. But if we know what we're fishing for and we use the right bait, maybe we'll get what we want. So it might be worth that discussion at this committee level.
Thank you. Go ahead.
So I agree with the mayor, and I think that along that line is maybe we need to step back before we release any rolling RFP and, get with our planners and take a look at the Towers area market study and see if we can clearly articulate what we're looking for, and then ask people if they're interested. So maybe that's a little more work on the staff's part to take that plan and take the site and, create a framework of an RFP that's more defined. Historically, we've been leaving them wide open to see what the private sector's creativity brings, but sometimes if you're too broad, nothing comes. So maybe we should try a more targeted approach.
I like, by spirit, I like the idea. I'm a little leery of what that might preclude as, my idea doesn't really fit, so I'm not going to even, try. I almost wonder if we should have the opposite of what you're stating, and an RFP that clearly lists what we don't want there, rather than something specific that we do want there.
Maybe, but sometimes you don't know what you don't want until you see it. So, it's hard
Yeah.
to, you don't want to start out from a negative position. You want to inspire people in a positive way, and so you don't want to say, if you are A, B, or C, don't bother. But, based on the design plan for the area, we know roughly what it should look like and what the occupancy should be. And so maybe we need to take a look at the RFP that we put out the first time, when Merge came forward, and see if that needs some work before we would do it again.
I would.
And not just release the same
I'd
language.
welcome that idea, like you say, a more focused RFP, just outlining, what the general vision is. I mean, we've always talked about, for that space, that we're looking for a multi-use approach, something that has people living there, working there, and enjoying themselves there. That's pretty much what we've, rather than a monumental office building that does nothing else but offices. We've looked at what we wanted to have is something more dynamic than that. What steps would we take to, through your department and who else to, develop that enhanced RFP? Does it, come out of Mr. Lentz's office too?
I think he's definitely a key consultant at that table, and you have to take a look at we just finished the Towers area market study, and in connection with that, we know that the WAS group is also visioning for their area, and they're trying to vision for their area. They're trying to tie it into the South Riverfront plan that we developed, and they're also trying to create a vision that dovetails with all the stuff that's happening to the north with the Y and the Aspirus Clinic. So that whole thing being sandwiched in the middle, I think we need a well-rounded approach, and the person that has been standing in the middle of all of that planning is Brad Lentz. So I think it definitely starts with him and the planning department, to help us create that vision.
Alder Killian.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I like what I'm hearing from the mayor and Alder Rasmussen on kind of including what may be kind of a targeted desire. And I think your point about exclusion also makes sense, but it's a little hard to, I think, maybe express what you may desire in the exclusionary sense. I think maybe having a targeted ask makes a lot of sense. But in addition to that, I had met with Mr. Godorzi recently about the project he's involved in with WAS, but I think that coupling not only perhaps a desire, but with, I think, some really statistical indicators of not just what the market will bear, but what the community will bear and may need. I think over the years, when we look at census data and American Community Survey data, there is some some real insights in there on kind of some things that may be lacking or some unmet needs. And if those, I think if the needs of the market can ever be merged with the needs of the community, that is where we really find that sweet spot. And I think with, we're seeing so much, it's called market rate, but for regular folks, it's essentially upscale housing development and rentals, particularly around the downtown area. I'd like to see kind of a little more of a well-rounded approach where we're not throwing kind of regular folks under the bus when it comes to housing. So if there would be a way to kind of couple desires and market needs with some of these pretty clear community needs, I think that would be just swell. Thank you.
Very good. Alder Watson.
So for this property, since it's already pretty useful as a parking lot right now, instead of like reissuing an RFP, maybe doing the investigation, seeing how it can be sort of folded into what they're already proposing for the rest of the downtown area, taking a little bit of time wouldn't be that bad of an idea. I mean, it's a useful piece right now, whereas the other place was sort of just, sitting empty. So maybe we can have them look into other options, look to see what can really mesh well with the rest of the downtown vision.
Yeah, it's useful right now. It's also potentially very impactful, though, depending on what we might see coming forward. So that's the thing that I keep, kind of looking for, So, Alder Rasmussen.
One other topic, I guess, is, needs change and our interests change, as things take place. And so, you'll recall that back when the Cobblestone Hotel emerged, we were just coming off the heels of a study that we had done when the riverfront was first starting out that told us, at least for the short term, that we were overbuilt with hotels. Is that still the case? We don't know. But, those factors can change. Pre-pandemic, we were doing a bang-up job on tourism until very recently. So, those factors that contributed to that study, which is now going on 6 years old, may be different post-pandemic. I mean, right now, everything's kind of in a holding pattern, but, what we maybe didn't want in terms of a land use 5 years ago, 2 years from now, we may really need. And so that's where I want to have our planners, put our planners out front of, figuring out what the area should be in terms of land use and density, and then we can kind of come up with maybe a better RFP.
Very good, thank you. Anything else from the committee? Well, looks like we have our work cut out for us. All right. And that would just move us on to number 8, updates from Mr. Fitzgerald.
Great, thank you. Excuse me, Alderman Young. The Wausau Center Mall planning, we've had this on, and I think we're going to continue to have it on every month, just to give you an update of where this process is after the presentation that you received with the Joint Finance Committee meeting last month. But at this point, we're in the final stages of putting together some very raw and rough estimates for the construction of the street grid and associated infrastructure in the area of the mall. And the intention with that is to use that towards a EDA grant that the city will be applying for this year. That's associated with some federal dollars that were made available in the wake of COVID. There's an 80% federal match, 20% federal, or I'm sorry, 20% local cost for something of that nature. And we certainly felt it was important to pursue when we can get 80 cents on the dollar from the federal government to cover some of those critical costs of redeveloping that area. And that's where that process is right now, we expect to be able to apply for that grant this fall sometime, I guess. The North Riverfront area has there's a number of department heads had toured that area last week, Friday, just trying to outline what portions would remain parkland in the future along the Riverwalk. We're getting to the stages of trying to identify what will be some of the boundaries for parcels, what's going to happen with some of the existing trees that are in the area, and Public Works is in the process of putting together some initial engineering estimates for the construction of an extension of River Drive north of Wausau Avenue. The goal is really to have that area in a developable state by next spring or next summer of 2021. And we have, as you've seen, some proposals that have come forward on that some are still in the works at this point. Wausau Cares loan, we still have for business owners that are watching, or if you have some business owners, there's still grants available. So far, we've given out close to $67,000 in Wausau Cares grants, but there are still about, do the math here quickly, about 10 of those grants that are available, $1,500 grants that are available. My understanding is that we don't have a deadline on this yet, so it's really until the funds are gone. And any small business owner that has not applied for this at this point is still eligible for the funds. Those can be applied for through McDevco at their website, mcdevco.org. The loans that have been made available at this point, it looks like $62,000 in loans have been processed so far by McDevco. I don't have a number of how many of those loans exist at this point, but we can update you next month. And then lastly, on the Thomas Street Phase 2 remnant property redevelopment, the community meeting has been, we've worked something out with the SG Jones neighborhood group, and we are going to be holding a meeting with the developer on August 17th at 6:30 at Riverside Park. Alderman Larson, Alderman Neal have coordinated with Officer Carr from the police department to try and organize this meeting along with the neighborhood group leadership, and we'll have some additional information coming out in coming days with their cooperation that we can help give to the neighborhood in advance of that meeting so that folks can come with a bit more prepared with some questions and concerns to address.
On planning for that meeting, when was the last time that we've had discussion with the developer?
It was about probably a week ago or so when we established that meeting date that we've discussed it with him.
Because, there might be a question of whether or not this is a solid date for the meeting, for sure, depending on, probably have to have a talk with the developer.
Yeah.
Right, but not in this environment. And I can say this, Mr. Blanker, still with us?
Yes.
Oh, there you are. The question we have here is the meeting set for August 17th on the Thomas Street proposals. Are you still okay with that date and intend to go forward with that?
I guess I am fine with it as long as you all are fine with it and the public is fine. I don't want to shortchange anybody if they don't feel comfortable and we need to push that back. We're certainly willing to do that as well, but I guess we're fine with that.
Okay, thank you.
If I may chime in there, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I think that date is likely viable. We've got enough time out to still even promote it more. Alder Larson is typically involved in that neighborhood group. If we could ask him the same question, but from my standpoint, I see the timing as solid. And it's my understanding that Alder Larson and I may touch base with ED staff, in the meantime to kind of discuss format and so forth. That's kind of what my anticipation was. Does that meet the committee and the ED staffs? Is that a comfortable process for you?
Okay.
That was a question, sir.
It's okay.
It's okay, sorry, I couldn't hear what, thank you.
Yeah, oh,
Sure.
thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, it's pretty much a goal on our end for this meeting date set here.
Okay.
And we do have it out on the neighborhood Facebook page as of today and stuff, so, and I did contact Mr. Fitzgerald, if he has anything additional he would like me to post on the Facebook page, to send it to me, and I'll make sure that it gets public.
Okay, thank you.
And a thank you to the ED staff for putting this together. I think it's positive.
Just a quick question. We had talked about doing a video feature. Is the video feature still an option to put up on the Facebook page so people can see it? Video the renderings and talk about the plan and,
You,
Yes? Do you have anything to add?
oh, I mean, yes, it's something we'd like to work on. I guess we anticipate working on it with Wausau Area Access Media. This is probably the first that they're hearing about it, but okay. But yes, I mean, that's, and basically, it's going to be taking some of the illustrations from the proposal, putting some text to it that
Yep.
kind of identifies the different properties that are being developed and the details on each of those properties.
I think that's helpful, and if that goes up on the city's Facebook page, then we could also then indicate how people can offer feedback if they can't come on the 17th, because people that may not be able to make it may have an opinion, so make some effort in that presentation to offer people a couple of different conduits to weigh in with an opinion.
Okay. Nothing further? I would welcome a motion to adjourn. From anybody? I have one from Alder Killian. Do I have a second? Thank you, Alder Watson. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. We are adjourned.